Providing power to the most powerful city in the world is an enormous task. The efforts and synergy of many are relied upon to perform this successfully. The power grid system provided by PEPCO is resilient, flexible, and ever-changing to meet the increased demand put on it by today's society. As strong as the system is, there can be temporary breakdowns caused by natural and man-made events. This is the story of one of those events. In October of 2018, there was a failure of a 36-year-old transmission power line feeder that crosses the Potomac River directly behind the Lincoln Memorial. This submarine cable rests upon the floor of the river and is connected at manholes on each side. The redundancy of PEPCO's system allowed power to flow to its customers while the feeder was replaced. As with all work performed by PEPCO, safety is the first priority. This project required protection of the workers and the public on land, sea, and air. With close proximity to Reagan National Airport, the FAA had influence on crane heights. The Army Corps of Engineers had jurisdiction over the navigable waters of the Potomac River. The National Park Service had their say about working within national park property. DDOT had rules to follow while working in the streets of DC. In addition, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of the Interior had to issue permits to allow the work to take place. The first step in solving any problem is to identify it. Identification, in this instance, was the easy part. The next step is to discuss potential solutions. PEPCO gathered their team of engineers and contractors to develop a solution and put an action plan in place. Once the engineering and action plan was in place, the construction moved forward. The first construction step to be implemented was the installation of traffic and pedestrian control devices that keep the public out of workspaces. This unique workspace consisted of land-based sites on each side of the Potomac, as well as the bottom of the river itself and the water above. Environmental concerns were extreme on this job. The proximity to the river, the water encountered within the excavations, and the possibility of sediment release were addressed during the design process. Defense mechanisms were implemented during the initialization of the work. It was determined by the regulating authorities that the water within the Potomac River was not clean enough to be pumped back into the river without first being cleaned and treated. The cleaning process required multiple steps of filtration and carbon treatment to be acceptable for discharge back into the river. Once the protective devices were in place for the public and the environment, installation of the new manholes on each side of the river commenced. The manholes for this project are the biggest of the entire PEPCO system. They had to be manufactured and installed in segments due to the weight and size. It took an oversized crane to set the segments that were then installed piece by piece. Custom rigging was built into the manholes to match up with the splicing equipment. The manholes had to be oversized to accommodate the splicing operations and equipment within. After the manholes were installed, the concrete encased duct banks that carried the submarine cable to the manholes were installed. These duct banks go out to the water's edge. The submarine cable that went into the river is a much larger diameter than the cables on land. To allow the work within the river to be accomplished, divers had to be sent into the river to identify the location of the existing power cables so that the new construction did not contact the existing feeders. Severe tide fluctuations controlled the pace of the work within and outside of the custom coffer dams that were installed. An historical wall along the banks of the river behind the Lincoln Memorial had to be drilled through in order to get the cables from the manhole to the riverbed. With the land-based infrastructure in place, the installation of the submarine cable from the west side of the Potomac to the east side could begin. The submarine cable reels were so large that they could not be transported on public roadways. The only way to get the cable to the site was by custom-built barge. Height restriction of the existing bridges and tide fluctuations limited the barge's access to the site. The trip from the port of Baltimore down to the Chesapeake Bay to the banks of the Potomac River behind the Lincoln Memorial took 7 days. Once the cables were pulled into place across the river, the splicing operations within the manholes could commence. The splicing operations are a highly specialized trade. The size and diameter and the weight of the submarine cable presented its own unique set of challenges. The final step of the project was to restore the work areas to a condition as good as, or better than it was originally encountered. Removal of all traffic control and protection devices left the site looking good as new. In retrospect, this project was one of the most challenging but yet most fulfilling for all involved. The logistical hurdles that dictated the schedule included the spawning of the American sturgeon in the Potomac River, the Cherry Blossom Festival, 4th of July events on the mall, bicycle races, and the revitalization of Memorial Bridge, all of which presented unique challenges that had to be overcome. Construction difficulties, including complex design, control and cleaning of water, coordination of outages, and permits from multiple governing authorities, all affected this project in a big way. Through all of the challenges, not one day of work was lost to injury, and not one member of the public was hurt. Putting safety first paid dividends on this most important of projects.